Hello, my dear students. Once again, I welcome you to the session. And today we are going to understand the topic sex-linked inheritance. So, we'll discuss about sex-linked inheritance. Now, coming to sex-linked inheritance, there are a number of characteristics which gets transmitted from the parents to the offspring through the genes that are present in the sex chromosome. So this transmission of the characteristics because of the genes that are present in the sex chromosome is called sex-linked inheritance. By definition, sex-linked inheritance, it means the inheritance of characters due to the expression of the genes present on the sex chromosome. Now let us try to understand what these sex chromosomes are. The sex chromosomes are those chromosomes which determine the sex, that is, the gender of the individual. Now, what is happening during sex-linked inheritance is these sex chromosomes carry genes that will provide non-sexual characters to the individuals. This means certain number of genes that are present in these sex chromosomes will enable the expression of non-sexual characters. That means these characters are not related to the sexual characters. Therefore, these non-sexual characters, which is getting transmitted from the genes from the parents to the offspring by virtue of being present in the sex chromosome is referred to as sex-linked inheritance. First of all, let us try to understand the sex chromosome before we get into the details of sex-linked inheritance and sex-linked inherited diseases. We know in humans the sex chromosome are of the following kind. If we consider the males, in the males, the sex chromosome are X and Y. X and Y represents sex chromosome in males. In females, the sex chromosome are X and X. There are 2 X chromosomes in female as sex chromosomes. So when we are trying to understand the inheritance of characters that is present in the sex chromosome, we are actually trying to understand the sex chromosome carrying the genes which will have their expression, and this is referred to as sex-linked inheritance. With reference to sex-linked inheritance, we shall try to understand sex-linked diseases. So, let us try to understand sex-linked diseases. Now, coming to sex-linked diseases. The sex-linked diseases are diseases due to the expression of the genes present in the sex chromosomes of the individuals. Therefore, by definition, sex-linked diseases are those diseases which are due to the expression of the faulty genes or defective genes present on the sex chromosome. Now, coming to these faulty or defective genes. The faulty or defective genes are those which are actually mutated genes. And because these mutated genes are present in the sex chromosome, these mutated genes have the ability to express themselves. And such expression leads to nothing but diseases. So such diseases which are inborn, that is, the individuals carry this disease from the time of their birth due to the faulty genes present in the sex chromosome, is called sex-linked diseases. Now let us try to understand some of the characteristics of these sex-linked diseases, which is expressed by the faulty or defective genes. characteristics of sex-linked diseases. Number one, the sex-linked diseases are controlled or expressed by recessive genes present on the sex chromosome. Number two, the females are generally the carrier of these diseases. Number three, the males express the disease or suffer from the disease. Number four, the sex-linked disease controlling genes are generally present on the X chromosome and therefore are also called X-linked diseases or X-linked inheritance. Number five, the sex-linked diseases follow a pattern of inheritance that is, the sex-linked inherited diseases are transmitted from the father to the daughter, or it is transmitted from the mother to the sons. Next, the sex-linked diseases follows a criss-cross pattern of inheritance. Now, let us summarize the characteristics of the sex-linked inherited diseases. The sex-linked inherited diseases is due to the expression of faulty genes present in the sex chromosome. These faulty genes, majority of them are present in the X chromosome. Therefore, it is also referred to as X-linked inherited diseases. Generally, the males suffer from these diseases, whereas the females do not suffer from this disease. There are exceptional cases where we find that the females also suffer, but generally the females do not suffer from the sex-linked inherited diseases. They simply become the carrier. I forgot to mention one point, that is, females are carrier for the sex-linked inherited diseases. They will carry it in the sense of the genes that expresses the disease, but as an individual, they will not express the disease. Now, coming to the other point of sex-linked inherited diseases, the sex-linked inherited disease follows a pattern of inheritance whereby we see these genes that has the ability to cause the disease is transmitted from the father to the daughter and from the mother to the son. Thereby we see this pattern of inheritance of the genes that controls the sex-linked inherited diseases follows criss-cross pattern of inheritance. That is, if this is the father and if this is the mother, then the transmission of these genes through the sex chromosome will be from the father to the daughter, and the transmission of the genes that is present in the sex chromosome will be from the mother to the son. Therefore, we see this pattern of inheritance is referred to as criss-cross pattern of inheritance. Now we shall study about the two important sex-linked inherited diseases. One of them is called hemophilia, which is very often referred to the bleeder's disease. In hemophilia, the individual suffering will lack the blood clotting factors. As a result of which the individual will not be able to stop bleeding even with minor injuries. Now, what is happening in this disease is, if an individual suffers from this disease, hemophilia, then that individual will not possess the blood clotting factor in the blood. We know that clotting of the blood requires a number of factors, and a person suffering from hemophilia will lack this blood clotting factor, as a result of which, if the individual suffers from any injury which leads to bleeding, then the bleeding will not stop in these individuals. And if the injury is severe due to excessive loss of blood, the individual will die. And this disease called hemophilia is a genetic disease. It is due to the defect in the genes. And this gene, which is a defective gene, is present in the sex chromosome. So, the gene for hemophilia is present in the sex chromosome. And in which sex chromosome? The sex chromosome is X chromosome. X chromosome. And the gene that causes hemophilia is a recessive gene. Recessive gene. Another disease is color blindness. The inability of an individual to distinguish red and green color among other colors. This is also a sex-linked inherited disease and is caused by a recessive gene. Once again, here also it is due to the expression of a recessive gene. And this recessive gene, once again, is present in the X chromosome, which is a sex chromosome. So, taking both these genetic diseases, both of them are actually due to the expression of the genes present on the sex chromosome, that is the X chromosome. That is the reason the sex-linked inherited diseases is also referred to as X-linked inherited diseases. Now, we shall try to understand the pattern of inheritance of these two diseases, that is hemophilia and color blindness. Now that what we are going to understand is very, very important, because here we shall understand the inheritance of hemophilia as well as color blindness simply with the help of symbols and X chromosomes. So in the very beginning, I would like to make you clear with what symbol resembles what characteristics. So please be focused and please try to understand what exactly is happening. Since both hemophilia and color blindness, we are taking hemophilia and color blindness, both diseases, both of which are controlled by the recessive gene. Both of them are controlled by the recessive gene. And this recessive gene is present on the X chromosome. X chromosome. So, if this X chromosome have to be identified for whether it is carrying the recessive gene or not, we use X chromosome with a symbol XO or X with a small c. In both the cases, these two X's having O and small c symbol will resemble nothing but the defective gene. Both these X chromosome are actually carrying the defective gene. In some textbook, O is used. In some textbook, C is used. Okay? And moreover, to express hemophilia, a small h is used with the X chromosome. So either this symbol XO is used to show us the defective gene that will give the expression for the disease hemophilia or color blindness. And in this case, this X chromosome with small c will also is resembling the defective gene. And since C is written out here, this will resemble color blindness. Likewise, since this X chromosome, which is a sex chromosome, has a defective gene, which is small h, will resemble or express hemophilia. So this one, this symbol X with H is meant for hemophilia. And this X, which is a sex chromosome with small x, is meant to make us understand that it is carrying a gene for color blindness. So from here, we shall now try to understand the transmission the pattern of inheritance from the parents to the offspring simply with the use of these sex chromosome with the symbols O, C or H. So number one, let us take an example. Of transmission of hemophilia. Now, there were few terms that were used in the earlier explanation given in the beginning as we proceeded with sex-linked inheritance. So these terms will be used here while we are trying to understand the pattern of inheritance. So number one, let us take a parent, okay, which is suffering from hemophilia, and the other parent is not suffering from hemophilia. To see how this defective gene gets transmitted or inherited in the progeny. So the symbols used for parents will be X and Y. For the male parent, so this becomes the father. Now this father gets married to this female, she becomes the mother. Now this X chromosome of the father, which is a sex chromosome, is carrying a gene for hemophilia. So let us write small h on the X chromosome. Now, this parent will produce gametes. So you see, they are producing the gametes. The gametes produced by the male is of two types, because we know human males are heterogametic in nature. They produce two types of gametes, heterogametic. One of the gamete will have X chromosome and the other gamete will have Y chromosome. However, the female, that is the mother, is going to produce only one type of gamete, because we know females are homogametic. They produce gametes of similar kind. So when the children are formed, now children are formed by the fusion of the gametes. So in this case, once again, we can use the Punnett square. So here we have the male gamete, here we have the female gamete. The male gamete is of this type and the female gamete is of that type. So this will be the type of combination for the children that will be produced by these parents. And this will be another type of combination of the sex chromosome for the children that these two parents are producing. Now, if you look into the characteristics of the children, one of the child is carrying a defective gene for hemophilia. This is a female child. and the other is a male child which is not carrying a defective gene which expresses hemophilia in the X chromosome. So this one is a male child. Now, if we look at these two children, then we find even though this female child is carrying a defective gene, that is, the gene which have the ability to express hemophilia is still not expressing hemophilia. She will not express hemophilia. The reason is very simple. Now, if we look at this female child, the female possesses two X chromosomes. The female is possessing two X chromosomes. So, these two X chromosomes are homologs to each other. Remember homologous chromosome? So, even if one of these X chromosome is possessing or is carrying a defective gene for hemophilia, the other X chromosome will have a dominant gene which will suppress the expression of this recessive gene which have the ability to express hemophilia. Therefore, this particular female child will not express hemophilia. In this expression, the dominant gene that is present on one of the X chromosome will mask the expression of the hemophilic gene. Thus, this particular composition, as far as the sex chromosome is concerned, carrying a gene which have the ability to express hemophilia, this child will not suffer from hemophilia, but this child, she becomes a carrier. Which means she will simply carry the gene for hemophilia, but she will not suffer from hemophilia. And the reason is very simple. Two X chromosomes, these X chromosomes are homologs to one another. Even though one of the X chromosome is carrying a defective gene, which is a recessive gene, the other X chromosome will always have a dominant gene that will suppress the expression of this defective gene. So she will not suffer from hemophilia, but she will become a carrier. That means when she grows and gets married and will have a child, if this X chromosome, which is having the hemophilic gene, is transmitted to her son, then that son of hers will suffer from hemophilia. Now let us see another example to understand the inheritance of sex-linked characters. So let us take another example. And this time we are going to take a normal father, that is with a carrier mother. Now, I have already explained to you all what carrier mother is. She is simply the carrier for the defective gene, but she will not express the disease. for that particular gene that she is carrying. So the mother will be X and X. And let us say one of the X chromosome that she is possessing has a defective gene for hemophilia. So one of her X chromosome has a gene for hemophilia. So this is the gene on this sex chromosome which causes the disease hemophilia. Now once again these two parents will produce gametes. The father will produce two types of gametes, X and Y. One of the gamete will have X chromosome as sex chromosome. The other gamete will have Y chromosome as the sex chromosome. The mother will produce now the same kind of gamete, homogametic, but one of the gamete having the X chromosome, that is sex chromosome, will have a defective gene which have the ability to express hemophilia. So this time we are going to take both the X chromosome. Now we come to the kind of children that they are going to produce. So once again we'll use the Punnett square to see the combination of the gametes. So that becomes the male gamete and this becomes the female gamete. So the female gamete, one of them has a sex chromosome carrying a defective gene for hemophilia and the other X chromosome is normal, which does not carry the gene for hemophilia. Now the father is normal, so we write X and Y chromosome without the presence of a defective gene. So once again we see the combination. The combination will become XX. This is a female child. Once again the combination of the male and female gamete, and here we have a male child. Likewise the 2X chromosome, a female child once again, and X and Y sex chromosome combining. Once again we have the male child. Now let us see what is happening. Let us take these two children. There are 4 progenies, there are 4 children being produced, but we see there are only 2 children where the defective gene is present on their X chromosome. So one of the child is a female child which is having a defective gene. Now the other child is a male child. So this is a female child and this is a male child. And the male child has one X chromosome and one chromosome. Now this female once again will not suffer from hemophilia, and the reason is very simple, as I explained in the earlier case. Both these chromosomes are homologs to one another. So even though one of the X chromosome is carrying a recessive gene, the other will carry a dominant gene. So the dominant gene that is carried by this X chromosome will suppress the expression of this recessive gene. Though it is not shown out here, it is understood this particular X chromosome is carrying the dominant gene. Now in this case, you see One is an X chromosome, the other is a Y chromosome. And these two chromosomes are different from one another. They are not homologues to one another. As a result of which, what happens? This particular defective gene, which is present on the X chromosome, will not have a dominant gene on the Y chromosome. Like it happened in this case, it's not going to happen in this case. As a result of which, what happens? Even though this defective gene is singly present, this recessive gene is singly present, this male child will suffer from hemophilia. Thus we see from these two examples two important characteristics that I explained in the very beginning before we started with this concept of inheritance of the characters carried by the defective genes. In the previous case, we saw when the X chromosome is being transmitted, which is having a defective gene, that X chromosome was actually derived from the father for a female child. Now in this case, what is happening? The male child is getting that X chromosome with a defective gene from the mother. So combining the two examples, the previous one and this one, we have understood that the inheritance of characters due to the genes present on the X chromosome follows a criss-cross pattern of inheritance. Now we shall understand sex-linked inheritance with the help of another example, and that is color blindness. So taking the example of color blindness. Now color blindness is also a sex-linked inherited disease, and as I have already explained, color blindness is the inability of an individual to distinguish red, green color amongst the other colors. Here we will follow a similar pattern of inheritance as we saw in case of hemophilia. So once again, let us take parents. Now, the father or the male parent has X and Y chromosome, and the mother or the female parent will have X and X as the sex chromosome. Now, let us assume that there is a recessive gene that controls color blindness in the X chromosome of the father. Now both these parents produces gametes. The gametes produced by the male parent once again will be heterogametic. Two types of gametes will be produced. One is a gamete containing X chromosome and the other is a gamete containing Y chromosome. However, the mother will produce only one type of gamete, that is containing X chromosome as sex chromosome. Now, coming to the children, that will be produced from the combination of these gametes. Once again, we will have to find the gametic combination with the help of a Punnett square. And here we have the female gamete. This side of the Punnett square we have the male gamete, where one of the gamete containing the X chromosome is carrying a recessive gene which expresses color blindness. So when we come to the gametic combination, this will be one type of combination of the gamete, and this will be another type of combination. From here, it is clear that one is a male child and the other is a female child. Now, this female child is carrying a recessive gene for color blindness. But as we know, this condition is a heterozygous condition. And it is to be understood that though the X chromosome here is carrying the gene for color blindness, the other X chromosome of this female child will carry a dominant gene for the recessive gene present on the other X chromosome. Hence, this child once again becomes a carrier. She will not express the disease, like we saw in case of hemophilia. When this condition is attained by a female child, because it is a heterozygous condition, to understand heterozygous condition, now I'll write a capital C on top of this other X chromosome. So now this becomes a heterozygous condition. So in this heterozygous condition, this child is not going to express color blindness, but she will become a carrier. And this male child does not receive the X chromosome from the father. It's only the female child that will get the X chromosome from the father. This child is getting his X chromosome from the mother. And the mother does not have a recessive gene for color blindness on the X chromosome. Therefore, this male child is not suffering from color blindness. Now we'll take another example to study inheritance of color blindness through the sex chromosome. So second example, let us take a male parent who is normal, and let us take a female parent who is a carrier of color blindness. Now this male parent will produce gamete, and the gametes produced are of two types. One will have the X chromosome, the other one will have the Y chromosome. In this case, the female though produces only one type of gamete, but there will be a difference for the gametes that she will produce, because one of the X chromosome will carry a recessive gene for color blindness, and the other one is not carrying the gene for color blindness. Ultimately, the gametes combine and the children are produced. So, coming to the production of the children, once again we use the Punnett square to see the gametic combination. Here we have the male gametes, and here we have the female gamete. One of the X chromosome carrying the gene for color blindness, and the other one a normal X chromosome of the female. So the gametic combination will show the following kind of progenies, where we see there are 2 male and 2 female. Now, these 2 children, one of them male and the other one female, are normal. They do not show any signs of color blindness. Neither this female is a carrier of color blindness. However, if we look at these 2 combinations, then we see this female child carrying a colorblind gene on one of her X chromosome will become a carrier of color blindness. As usual, the other X chromosome will carry a dominant gene which will suppress the expression of this colorblind gene. The male child receives his X chromosome from the mother. And that X chromosome that he has derived from the mother, unfortunately, is carrying a recessive gene for color blindness. Hence, this male child will suffer from color blindness. In this case, the X chromosome carrying the recessive gene for color blindness will not have a dominant gene on the Y chromosome. As I have already reminded you in the previous explanation which was delivered for hemophilia, these 2 chromosomes are not homologs to one another. So whatever genes will be present on the X chromosome will not have its complement on the Y chromosome, and vice versa. So from both the examples that we have studied till now, that is hemophilia as well as color blindness, we come to a common conclusion. And the conclusion are very simple. Number 1, the sex-linked inherited diseases are caused due to recessive genes. Next, the recessive genes are present on the X chromosome. Number 3, the males suffer, whereas number 4, the females are carrier of the disease. And last of all, the inheritance of sex-linked inherited diseases follows criss-cross pattern, that is, from the father to the daughter and from the mother to the son. Or we can also say from the father to the daughter, where the daughter will become a carrier, and then into the grandsons from the daughter. And in case of the male child receives the recessive gene from the mother, and the male child will then transmit the recessive gene to the granddaughters. Before we wind up for the session, it is better to know why the males suffer more than the females regarding sex-linked inherited diseases. The answer for which is very simple. We take two cases. Number one is a female. Now the female have two X chromosomes, and even if one of the X chromosome is carrying a recessive gene for hemophilia or color blindness, the other X chromosome will have an anti-hemophilic gene or a dominant gene for this hemophilic gene. Thereby, in such a condition, the female will not suffer, which has already been explained. Now, in case of the male has one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. These two are not homologous with one another. Therefore, if this particular X chromosome is carrying the gene which will express hemophilia or color blindness, the male will suffer from hemophilia or color blindness. However, the female can suffer from hemophilia or color blindness only in one condition. And the condition is, she will suffer from hemophilia or color blindness only if both the X chromosome, that is the sex chromosome that is the female is carrying, will have the recessive gene. So both of which, if carries the recessive gene, in this case, the female will become a sufferer. Because this condition, where both the sex chromosome, that is the X chromosome, are carrying the hemophilic gene or the colorblind gene. So in this condition, the female becomes homozygous recessive for hemophilia or color blindness. Therefore, the female will suffer from the sex-linked inherited disease. So, in this condition, the female will not suffer because this is a heterozygous condition. So it is only when the female carries the recessive gene controlling hemophilia or color blindness in both the sex chromosome, that is both the X chromosome, then she will suffer from hemophilia because this condition is a homozygous recessive condition. This is the reason generally we find the males will suffer because the male will have only one X chromosome and the Y chromosome will not have any gene which is dominant for this hemophilic gene on the X chromosome. So even if the male is carrying the gene which is recessive for hemophilia or color blindness in the X chromosome, then the males will suffer. Whereas for the females, the condition varies. In the homozygous condition, she will suffer, but in a heterozygous condition, she will not. And this is a very, very rare condition. So that brings us to the end of today's session regarding sex-linked inheritance and sex-linked inherited diseases. Thank you.